And thank you, Jason, and the whole committee and team have been working on this. It's been a remarkably wonderful week. Introducing our speaker this morning is Dr. Meredith Whitnaw. She's Professor of Sociology and Gender and currently teaching a class on race. So, Meredith, would you introduce our speaker this morning?
Good morning. I'm grateful to be able to introduce Michael Emerson to you today. Emerson earned a BA from Loyola University of Chicago and an MA and PhD in sociology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. After being a faculty member at several different universities, Emerson recently moved back to Chicago, where he is currently the provost at North Park University. Emerson has published prolifically on issues of race, religion, and urban contexts, including the award-winning book Divided by Faith, co-authored with fellow sociologist Christian Smith. This book draws on extensive survey and interview data to argue that there are particular features of white evangelicalism that can stunt our attention to racial inequality. He has also worked to articulate a vision of how we might address racial inequality, especially considering the role of multiracial churches. Emerson's work and his life reflect a commitment to both scholarly insight and practical knowledge. He approaches issues of critical importance with the aim of not just diagnosing problems, but also suggesting how things might improve. We are honored to have him with us today, so please join me in extending a warm welcome to Michael Emerson.
Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate it. Well, your pastor was telling me that we're supposed to say top of the morning. And top of the morning, we're supposed to reply by saying, and the rest of the day to you. Okay, so there we go. So God gives us different gifts. By the way, I'm really excited to be here. I have never been to Westmont. I've heard always about Westmont, but this is my first time here, so glad to be here. God gives us different gifts. Thank you. And some gifts were not given. So I have not been given the gift to sing. So I really appreciate always when people share, because it's something I cannot do. I once tried in a church, sang a solo. 200 people switched religions. I have won a singing contest, and that is when the Emerson clan had a contest to see who is the worst singer among the Emersons, and I won, beating out my sons, so I feel pretty good about that. How race works, usually when we talk about race, if I'm sitting in an audience and somebody's going to talk about race, I sort of cringe a little bit, thinking, what are we going to do with that? This is not trying to see how you might personally feel on the issue. What we're going to focus on is how race works in our nation, how the devil twists it and uses it for the devil's purposes of evil. So, let's take a familiar verse and start with this. In Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. As I've gotten older, I've come to believe this more and more, that this really is what's happening, that we really are in a constant spiritual battle, that we're not fighting other people, that the same evil principalities are warping us continually. This is so simple, this fact of what the devil does, but I always say the devil majors in D's. Distorts, divides, destroys. We could add devours. There's many other things, but that's what the devil spends the time doing. And then God, of course, majors in R's, redeeming, restoring, reconciling. So when I see distortion, division, destruction, I know that is the work of those powers and principalities of evil. When we see unity, when we see redemption, restoration, reconciliation, we see God. So, I want to give one term here that's going to guide our whole talk today, and that is what I call the racialized society, which the U.S. is probably the world's best example of. South Africa might come close. What is a racialized society? It's one where race matters profoundly for our life experiences, our life opportunities, and our social relationships. So, we don't by chance if we look at who people marry, who their friends are, where they live, and so on, and we'll look at this in just a moment, it isn't just chance meetings, right? It's structured by this concept called race. And key to a racialized society is that we create groups and then they are ranked, okay, so that you can actually measure that ranking. We could say, no, they're not ranked, but we can see it over and over again, and we'll look at it today. You can look at so many measures and see that we are unequally ranked. And it's not just money. It's prestige. It's your very personhood. Are you worth something or are you not? Okay, so in the U.S., traditionally, we think about society has rewards to give, and it can be, again, money, jobs, but it's also prestige, friendships, and so on. Traditionally, we were a black-white society, with whites getting more of society's rewards, blacks getting less. As we've become more diverse since the 1960s, because we changed our immigration laws, there's a second plane by which we need to understand racialized society, and it is, are you seen as a foreigner or as an American citizen? And for Asians and Hispanics, typically, even if they've been here 3 generations, 6 generations, the concept is usually foreign. So people say, where are you from? And you say, San Francisco. No, where are you really from? They want to know, even though you've been in San Francisco for multiple generations. And then, of course, Native Americans don't even make this whole hierarchy here. They're just basically forgotten. Okay, so you can see this racialized society. I'll give you some evidence of this. So this is a graph looking at what men make, just men, over an 18-year period here. And you can see, maybe you can see, hopefully, that white and Asian make essentially the same over time, and that black and Hispanic make substantially less. And as the economy changes, they change, but that gap always seems to remain. Okay, so sociologists are weird. So one of the things that I did is actually take a Forbes. Every year they rank the richest people. And so these are the richest people in the nation. I did this in 2010. The 400 richest, I counted them. 387 are white, 9 are Asian, 3 are Hispanic, 1 is African American. That one African American actually lives here, I just learned, or at least owns property. Who do you think it is? Oprah. People always know. Okay, and then no Native Americans are billionaires. Yeah. Oprah is the only American billionaire ever. One of the things I do is I keep track of the ways in which the U.S. is racialized, and I keep this list. This list, if I found 10 studies or more saying there is racial gaps in this area, then I put it on this list. So I'm going to have these come up. I'll just let you take a look at them. And then I basically run out of room. So some matter quite a bit, like how long you'll live is very racialized in the U.S. Some seem to matter a lot less, what TV stations and what shows we watch. Turns out, not only do we watch different shows based on our racial background, but we even see the same commercials in different ways. So when people make commercials, they know who's watching and they market them in different ways. So McDonald's advertises different if they think the audience is mostly African American than if they think they're mostly Hispanic than if they think they're mostly white. All right, here's key. Race has not stayed the same in the United States, and we tend to think so. And the problem when we think so is that we then use an old system and say, well, we're not that, so we've gotten much better. It's not that we've gotten much better, it's that we have changed with the economy. The economy shapes our systems. So there's 3 basic times in our whole history. Plantation economy, this is during slavery times. Racial caste, you are enslaved or you are not. Very, very clear cut. Till 1865, then we entered the single most remarkable period in American race relations. It hasn't been recently. It was from 1865 to 1877, Reconstruction. The old system was gone, the whole economy was changing, and there were no rules for how races were to interact. So, what happened in this 12-year period? African Americans started getting elected. They were huge percentages in the South, and in a democracy, most votes win, right? They're getting elected to U.S. Congress. We had more black senators in that period than we've had since. We had governors. We had supreme justices, heads of state. It was a remarkable period. But you can imagine if you had lived 12 years earlier and you were white, this is a very uncomfortable system. So a new system was put into place in an agreement between the North and the South. And they had two different kinds of economy, so you get two systems. Jim Crow system in the South. Jim Crow is, if you're not familiar, basically separate but equal. Everything will be separate. And then what's called de facto segregation in the North, which is we don't have it into law, but we put it into codes, where you can live, where you can't live, who you can work for, who you cannot. So that went for about 90 years. Then we know we had the civil rights movement, and our economy was changing to something different. We were becoming post-industrial. We had been industrial during this period. We were changing something called post-industrial. We had a period of racial progress that again lasted 12 years, 1968 to 1980. This is when we saw many more people of color going to college, higher percentages, moving into the middle class, and some real change. But then a new system came into place, which we call the colorblind racialization. Okay, in our new creative and information-based economy, this system is one we may not be familiar with, so I'm going to show you the 4 steps that create it. All right, and because I'm doing chapel, I got to make them rhyme, almost as if I'm preaching, right? So we decolorate, we segregate, we incarcerate, and we alienate. These are the 4 main tools used for our current system. What does decolorate mean? This is a colorblind ideology that came out of the 1960s, an outgrowth from that, saying we need to be post-racial, so we will no longer think that race exists. So let us look beyond that. It seems like a good idea, but it's been used so that we can't actually address race. It would be like saying, you have cancer, but I'm going to pretend you don't. We're going to say you don't, and so we won't treat the cancer. It's not going to be very healthy in the long run. I like to say it's this perspective that it's all behind us. So, all right. Segregate. This one has been used in previous eras. It's used now, even though we have no laws for it. So let me show you. Any city in the country, you can do this. I'll show you a couple. There's always certain areas of the city reserved for certain races of people, which is interesting because race, of course, is an invented concept starting in about the 1500s. Yet we use this to determine where we're going to live. So this is Detroit, which has a very clear demarcation where you see the red. These are overwhelmingly African American neighborhoods. There's a line there, I think Eminem sang about it, called 8 Mile Road. And that's sort of where the demarcation is. I use Detroit in this case because they're basically a black and white city. There aren't many cities like that anymore. Most are multi. So here's Milwaukee. Very clear area where African Americans live. There's a growing area where Latinos live, Hispanics live, and then a huge swath where white folks live. I live in Chicago. This is Chicago. Chicago has 2 massive areas that are black. It's colored in green here. 2 large areas that are Hispanic neighborhoods. That's the orange. And then the purple is the white neighborhoods. And then there's a few barrier neighborhoods where there's transitioning from one group to another. Those are in the white. How about Los Angeles? Supposed to be often held up as the ultimate integrated place. But it really isn't. It's diverse, but it's not integrated. So it has massive, massive areas of Hispanic neighborhoods. It's one of the main places in the country that actually has multiple Asian neighborhoods. That's in the green, if you can see that. Very small black population percentage-wise, and there's a few neighborhoods. But then again, still on the outskirts, basically all white neighborhoods. All right, so let me get personal here. So in 1999, my family and I moved to Houston, Texas. I took a job at Rice University, and we had never lived in Texas or anywhere in the South before. So we had no idea what to do. We got a realtor, and we told our realtor we want to live in a diverse neighborhood. First realtor said, I can't do that. I'm not supposed to take race into account. Fired that realtor, hired another one. Said, we want to live in a diverse neighborhood. Can't do that. I'm not supposed to take race into account. I said, I think the law about race was so that you don't show me just white neighborhoods. And I'm asking you to show me diverse neighborhoods. Wouldn't do it. Fired her. hired an African American realtor, said we want to live in a diverse neighborhood. Oh sure, brought us right to it. Okay, so this is our neighborhood. You see the arrow. We moved here in 1999. That's our home. It's sort of a United Nations of people. It's a cul-de-sac, new neighborhood. When I look at it in terms of American categories of race, about a third African American, 18% Hispanic, 27% Asian, 23% white, and then a lot of people are immigrants from different places in the world. 5 years later, took a job at Notre Dame, so had to sell our house because we moved. All right, again, I told you sociologists are weird, so I kept track of who sold their houses and who moved into the houses. So what I'm going to show you here is that 5 years later when we're moving, which houses had changed hands. So you'll see that we did, and then I've put which families moved there. And in terms of racial categories, look what happened in 5 years. 45% black, 23% Hispanic, 32% Asian. We were the last white family to leave. This happened block after block after block. This is a huge kind of subdivision development, and it was like this. And this is one of the things we find in our research. You can have integrated neighborhoods in this country, but not if you want whites to stay there. They don't stay long term. Why does this matter? You would say, so what? People live where they want to live. Here's the implication of it. So this is a chart of people who are poor living in metropolitan areas in the United States. So everybody on this chart is poor, but it's by race and by the type of neighborhood these poor folks live in as defined by the government. So for whites and you're poor, the most common experience is that you live in neighborhoods that are not poor. So that most everybody around you is not poor, whereas you get, for black and Hispanic, the mirror image. The most common experience is that you live in neighborhoods where at least 40% of the people around you are poor. Now, why would this be? This can only be, and it has to be, because of two factors. One, we have inequality in access to money and wealth. But the thing that forms what you're seeing here is segregation by race. So you concentrate poverty for the groups that experience more of it, and you actually intensify, or minimize, the experience of poverty if you are white. Because you mostly get to grow up in neighborhoods that aren't poor. And it matters. The more poverty neighborhood, we find there's more crime, there's less access to services, educational quality is not as good, there's much more turnover in people in the neighborhoods and people in your schools. It's pretty profound impact. I mentioned this about access to income and wealth and such. I want to show you a study here which happened a long time ago, but I'll update it in a moment. So here was a professor studying Milwaukee and wanted to see what happens to housing values for whites and blacks. So he said, if you bought homes in 1971 in Milwaukee, and you say it's worth $40,000, the homes they bought, what were they worth in 1993? Looking at the change. So in 1993, houses for whites that they bought for $40,000 were worth $250,000. So just by buying their house, they made over $200,000. What happened for blacks who also bought houses at the same amount? Their houses were worth $32,000. They lost $8,000. They did the same thing. They each bought homes. But because of segregation by race, homes in black areas, Hispanic areas, get depreciated because there's much less demand because whites won't move to such neighborhoods. It has a massive impact on wealth creation. Huge. Okay, but you say, that was so far back I wasn't even born yet. So I had my graduate students at Rice University say, let's update the study. How about doing it in Houston where they are students? Let's do it for the last 10 years. They just finished the study and they went all the way through December of 2015. And they actually got more sophisticated, where we try to look at identical neighborhoods, not just that they bought houses of the same value, but if we could hold constant the things that you see there, school quality, which we're able to do with statistical procedures, commute times to work, poverty rates, what happened to the average value of homes. The only thing that varies is what's the neighborhood. Is it 85% or more white, Hispanic, or black? There aren't big enough Asian neighborhoods to look at. So if you purchased a home in Houston in 2005 and sold it in 2015, you made $82,000 on your home if you lived in a white neighborhood. If you lived in a Hispanic neighborhood, you lost $4,400. And if you lived in a black neighborhood, you lost $26,500. Again, they're doing the same thing. We're holding the neighborhood quality constant. The mere fact of the kind of neighborhood you live in shapes whether you're going to make money or not. I want to illustrate this with our own family life here. So here's the neighborhood. We went to Notre Dame, stayed there for a little bit, and went back to Rice University. So when we moved back, this is the neighborhood that we lived in. 80% African American, 16% Latino, 4% other. Maybe a neighborhood of 10,000 people. There were 4 children who were white there. My wife and I are 4. They were the only ones. So we actually had a house built there. Again, it was a new neighborhood, so we could choose what kind of house we wanted, and this is how much it cost us, $273,000. We had to sell because we were moving to Denmark. So in 2012, we were able to get an agreement to sell it for $225,000. You can see we're losing money, but we could not sell it for more. That was the best offer we could get. I don't know if you know how housing works, but the next step is that you get your house appraised. Right? So there's independent firms, and they tell you what you can sell your house for. You would think you could sell it for what someone's willing to pay, but it doesn't work that way. So our house is appraised, and appraisals work like this. They take the other homes in your neighborhood, look at what they sold for, see how many square feet you have, maybe you do a few adjustments, and basically you have to sell your home at the exact same price per square foot as everybody else in your neighborhood. So it's not an individual American thing, really, right? It's communism. Your price is shaped by what neighborhood you live in, and that's it. Okay, so when the appraiser came and said, you cannot sell your house for $225,000, it is not worth that. It is worth $160,000. So we worked very hard to find somebody to buy our house, and we finally able to sell it for that, $160,000. So what happens to our wealth creation? We lost $113,000. Now catch this, because it's really important. If anybody should be able to benefit from American society, it should be the guy standing right here talking. White, middle-aged, PhD, employed full-time, no prison record. Everything should work in my favor. Why doesn't it? Because I do not play the game the way I'm supposed to. I'm supposed to live in white neighborhoods, and then all the benefits will accrue to me. Because I don't do that, the system says, well then, tough luck, buddy, you lose. This happens over and over. I'm giving you one example, but we've done this multiple times. Always happens. Okay, so that's important. It isn't individual. We're talking about a group-level phenomenon that will affect anybody and everybody, and does. And because it works this way, and we know this subconsciously, when it comes time to actually buy a home, we look for places where we think the price will increase. Continued impact. So what happens when we sell in 2012, December of 2012? We go to Copenhagen, we're there for a little over a year, and we come back. We rent for another year in Houston, and then we move to Chicago a year and a half ago. Want to buy a house. So we apply for a loan, and guess what we learn? They said, it looks like you did what's called a short sale. So on our home that we sold for $160,000, we owed still about $180,000. So the bank has to make a deal where you can sell the house and they forgive the difference, right? So that's called a short sale. We're forced to do it because of the appraiser saying you can't sell it for more. Okay, so we did that. Well, then the government has a rule. You did a short sale, therefore you have done a very bad thing. So you cannot get a loan, a conventional loan for a house, for 4 years. You must be penalized for 4 years. So we are trying to buy a house, we can't get a loan. Now I'll tell you what we actually did is that we have sort of this stays in us, right here. We have like this offshore loan that isn't really a U.S. loan, but it was limited to half of what the house was worth. So we had to find the cash for the other half, which meant raiding our retirement, which is the dumbest thing ever to do. Which then meant right now I'm busy paying the government a massive fine for taking money out of my retirement, right? Because I'm not supposed to do that. In January, we finally qualify for a real live American loan, and we're going to go in and try. And hopefully, the impact is done. But this is the way the system is structured, right? Okay, what is this? How does this impact then the bottom line? What are people actually worth by racial group? So in 2002, black median net worth, everything you own minus everything you owe. What do you got left? Black median net worth $6,000 in 2002, Hispanic $8,000, white $90,000. So that gap in 2002, whites had over 11 times more wealth than Hispanics and 15 times the wealth of blacks. Now notice I put what the gap was in 1988. It did not get smaller, it got bigger. It takes wealth to make wealth. The systems I'm saying, every day, people living in their homes, living in their neighborhoods, every day, money's either being generated simply by being in that neighborhood or it's being lost. So this gap keeps growing. So let me update it. There's been this great study out of the University of Michigan where they follow the same, in this case, black and white families. So they've been looking at them since 1984 and following what happens to their wealth creation. And what they found is that over this period, these families have grown, the gap between the black and the white families has grown fourfold. So it looks like this. Here's what's happened to black wealth over that time in this study. It's basically been flat, around that $5,000, $6,000. Here's what happened to white wealth. Massive gains, making money on their homes, being able to invest that extra money they're making in the stock market, and so on. So the latest data is from U.S. government is from 2012, and here's what they reported. So whites have on average 50% more wealth than Asians, 18 times more wealth than Hispanics, 20 times more wealth than African Americans. When this first came out, and I've been tracking the growth, I said, I don't know of a single country ever to have such gaps that doesn't essentially burn, go into revolution. You cannot have this massive of gaps between people groups and expect people to just sit quietly. And as we see what's happening across our country, when we see it on TV, this is part of what's happening. People are saying enough. The church is racialized too. So how segregated are U.S. congregations? We've been doing studies tracking it since 1988. Here's what we have found. That churches are 10 times more segregated than the neighborhoods they sit in. So another way to say that is if churches would reflect their neighborhoods, they would be 10 times more diverse than they are. And if we compare them to public schools, they're 20 times more segregated or 20 times less diverse. So one of the things we find is when people get to choose, they choose to be with people like themselves. Who are people like themselves? That gets defined by our larger society. Similar culture, similar background, friendships. So we've been studying what happens if you go to multiracial congregations, interracial congregations. I'm not going to get into how we define that, but I'm going to have three groups here. Those who are in those kind of congregations, those who are in homogenous congregations, basically all the same race, and then those who don't go to church at all. Okay, so if you're in the same race congregation, what this chart is saying is that 83% of people say, all or most of my friends are the same race as me. If they don't go to a congregation, it's 70%. There's one less plane to have you make your friendships on your same racial category. If you go to a multiracial congregation, look what happens there. Only a third say most or all my friends are the same race. We've been interviewing people and asking, did this happen before you got here or after? And about 80% of the effect is after. Once I got here, I started meeting people I otherwise wouldn't have met, and they introduced me to people I wouldn't have met, and their friendship patterns change. And I have all broken down by category just to show you that for each racial group you get the same effect. Okay, well, we said there's 4 steps. Here's the third, incarcerate. So in this system, I don't know if some of you have ever read this in a class or heard of it, but The New Jim Crow is the most amazing book on incarceration in our current era of race relations and why incarceration has become such an important component of it. Here's why it matters when conviction rates are about 20 times greater for black and Hispanic than whites, even if they do the same crime. If you're convicted of a drug offense or imprisoned, here's how you're made a second-class citizen. So you cannot then get student loans anymore. You cannot live in public housing. You can't serve on juries. You'll have to wait at least 12 years to vote. Of course, you're severely limited in your employment opportunities. Who wants to hire somebody with a prison record, right? You're much more likely to be sent back to prison. And so she says, we have created a new Jim Crow, a new system of making you a permanent second-class citizen. You're not a full American citizen. Most of these things up here are part of what it means to be an American citizen, and you are denied them from then on. And then finally, we alienate. And we certainly see talk of this in the media and such. This is where people are not people. They're aliens. So they're illegal aliens. Immigration, and this isn't just in the U.S., right? This is happening in most countries that experience immigration. There's huge debate on whether we can have that or we cannot. But that's part of our system, is to classify people based on their immigrant status and to value them in different ways. So, just to remind you, decolorate, segregate, incarcerate, alienate. All right, just a couple more slides here to show you now. Here's the problem, the real gap. They mentioned that we wrote this book called Divided by Faith, and we were looking at how do people think about race. So, white evangelicals think about race in very specific ways that we found. Didn't matter age, didn't matter if they were in California or Alabama or Massachusetts, didn't matter if they were male or female, if they were Presbyterian, if they were Lutheran, if they were evangelical. When we ask, what is the race problem? This is what the answers always were. It's individual sin, it's misinterpretation between people, division between individuals. So a lot of times people will say something like, you'll see a white guy and another white guy argue, and you'll say, they're having an argument. But when you see a white guy and a black guy have an argument, you say, there's a race problem. So that's what they would basically define the race problem as. Individuals not getting along. Okay, and then once in a while they would say, the race problem is Jesse Jackson, or the race problem is, and they'd name somebody, a minority that they see as being self-interested, making money off of trying to make race a problem. When we talked to non-white evangelicals of color, we found very different answers. When we asked, do you think there's a race problem in America, the most common response was laughter, over and over and over and over again. Why are you laughing? Because it is so obvious it's not a question. So they found it funny that would ask the question. When we get more into the detail, what is the race problem? These are the answers. Unequal access to education, neighborhoods, and resources. Some of the things we were just looking at. And systematic discrimination, be that in the criminal justice system, be it in housing, banking, employment, and so on. How does this look in 2016? What I'm going to show you, this chart just came out last week. And, I hope it's there. Okay, let's look at what Martin Luther King had to say first. We will be greatly misled if we feel that the racialization problem will work itself out. Structures of evil do not crumble by passive waiting. Evil must be attacked by the counteracting persistence, by the day-to-day assault of the battering rams of justice. Okay, and here's what it looks like then in 2016. So who are we going to vote for? If you are an evangelical and white, 65% say they're voting for Trump. If you are an evangelical and not white, 62% say they're voting for Clinton. And this gets into really messy stuff then, because each side, each group of people says, how could you possibly vote for the other candidate? And this is part of why we call it divided by faith. It's actually, we are more divided among Christians than non-Christians are on these kind of issues. Okay, last chart. So what can you do? It's fun enough to say, here's what it is, but then what? We don't want to be hopeless, and it isn't hopeless. So one, and this is, I call them the just bees. If you just remember the bees. Not the birds and the bees, just the bees. Yeah, just bee. That's why I have to say it that way. Believe your brothers and sisters. One of the things that amazed me as our own family's life changed is I realized how I had not believed my brothers and sisters of color when they would say what they were experiencing. I did not believe it because it didn't match my reality. So my immediate reaction was to say, that can't be true. What do you got in this? Why are you saying this? I thought you were a Christian. So the biggest thing for my family and I was to say, was a real humbleness of just, okay, I'm going to listen. Tell me more. And trust that a fellow Christian brother or sister is going to tell me the truth. It makes a profound difference. To be prayerful. I work with a professor at North Park. His name is Soong-Chan Rah, and he wrote a book on Lamentations. And he will tell you, what should you do when he's asked about race? He will say the first thing we must do is do the biblical thing of lament. We must get on our knees and cry out to God. That we somehow a structure has been created that creates such inequality between us, such massive different experiences. God, we didn't know. God, we are sorry. God, show us how to move forward in a positive way together. Be radical. Now, my be radical, there's different ways you could be radical. But mine is, and I know it's a little hard here in this area, but this is really truly radical. You would be the battering rams of justice against the system if you say, I'm going to church where I'm the minority. Why? You completely upset the system just by making that choice. You can do it also in where you live and so on, but you can do that. I spoke at a place called Ouachita Baptist in Arkansas, and they're a very diverse town that they're in, about half black, half white, only black and white, really. And I put a chart up and I said, here's black areas, here's the white areas, and I actually put churches on there. I said, so if you're white, you can go to these churches, if you're black, you can go to these churches. So about 2,000 students. My son happened to go there at the time, so he kept track of this for me. He said, 3 people took me up on the offer. So even at the young age, when you aren't combined and you're not folded into the system yet, this is when you can be radical, and it won't even cost you anything, really. You're not having to hold on to a job. Usually you're not married yet. You're not invested in a home yet. Be radical. Even if it's just for a couple of years, at least upset the system. Have fun. And then finally, to be active. One of the things that I've always learned is if I become passionate about something, somebody else already is. God's already doing a work. So I'm trying to find those folks. So there's a group of young evangelicals, very young leaders, and even younger students like yourself. It's called Evangelicals for Justice. You could join that movement. You can join some other faith-based groups that work for racial justice here in Southern California or wherever. The idea is to join God in what He's doing. And God, of course, as you've been focusing on this week, is looking for us to be agents of change for justice. Of course, this is part of God's heart. So, I think that we will stop there. And let me stop with a prayer. They told me I had to stop at 11:18. And you know what time it is? 11:18. All right, I'll pray. Father, I just praise you that you have brought each and every one of these students, staff, faculty, administrators here to Westmont to focus on your word, to focus on the beauty, to focus on your truth, to focus on your creation. Lord, I ask that you would work not only in our individual hearts, but work in us as a collective, as a people of God, to do great and mighty things, the things that you yearn to see happen, and that you are willing to wait so that we may walk alongside you as you do these amazing things. I thank you and I pray for the health and well-being of everyone here. In your holy and precious name, amen.